All right, so here we are, 2026. We begin another legislative session. What are you focused on as we head here?
Well, I think affordability is what everybody is focused on both sides of the aisle. And me personally, I have legislation that would outlaw utility surcharges, essentially saving $100 million for ratepayers in New York State. We have plans to streamline the acquisition of property for municipalities, cutting through red tape. But also I think at the main thrust of that, energy is what I think a lot of people are thinking about right now. And we find ourselves in an interesting position where Governor Cuomo's climate and energy policy plan, the CLCPA, is essentially at odds with our new plan.
Yeah.
And the governor is seeking an appeal through the state Supreme Court. Why are we fighting this? Why wouldn't we just repeal the CLCPA and start new? Why are we going to continue to rely on intermittent renewables instead of focusing on what this new plan calls for, broadening of gas and new nuclear power?
Yeah, all of the above approach, right?
Yes.
That's what we've been hearing over,
Yes.
I guess, the past 6 months. That has shifted. Why do you think it has shifted?
Because I think it met reality. It shifted because we live in a different reality than where the CLCPA was looking. And when you look at what is called for in that plan, it's not going to meet the needs of New Yorkers. And I'm not saying that we can't have alternative energy sources, but they need to fit the reality that we live in, and we can always work towards that, right? But I think it's important that we shift towards the broadening of nuclear, whether it's small modular nuclear or mobile nuclear reactors, and outfitting and renovating previous gas facilities that we have as well, because that's what's going to fit this all above approach.
You hear the environmental groups push back against some of that, right? That they say, we're standing by this because we believe that the transition will be cheaper and it will save and it will cost more for natural gas. What is your response when you hear that from them? Because it seems like there's that same argument coming from both sides right now of this is going to cost more, this is going to cost more.
I think that's patently false. I think everybody can see that in their rates continuing to go up. And we hear this not only from ratepayers, the utilities themselves, but also the independent system operator for the state of New York, which doesn't have a stake in the game other than just providing New Yorkers with the energy that they need. They're telling us this too, right? Because they see the flow of energy across the state of New York from all sources that are available to us, and they're telling us this. I think that's a population, I think that's a segment that we should be listening to.
There is another layer of the PSC chair who has said on multiple occasions that he doesn't tie rising utility costs to an energy transition. What do you make of that? Because he's the one, obviously, who's regulating this at some point. He's tying it to infrastructure, aging infrastructure, supply chain, things of that nature.
Oh, I think that fits in parts of it, right?
Yeah.
How are we supposed to have an all-above approach if our aging infrastructure, if the grid itself is in need of these repairs, in need of expansion? So not only do we need to expand the grid 4.5 times its size, right? But we also need to make sure that the existing grid that we have fits what we're pursuing. And I think we find ourselves at an opportunity to where we can essentially outfit the grid for small modular nuclear, right? We find ourselves at this crossroad. Why not invest in that?
Yeah. Let's get to healthcare now, because I think that obviously at the federal level we've heard a lot about the end of those subsidies expiring. Even some of your Republican colleagues in Congress, Mike Lawler for one, has pushed back and said they want to extend those, as they're not extended at this point, and people are really nervous, concerned about their premiums going up. What's the state's role in helping individuals who might now be facing really high healthcare costs?
Well, I think we can, I think here at the state we can certainly support that, and I am in full agreement with Congressman Lawler. I do not think that should be used as a bargaining chip, and in fact I think it's an easy win for Republicans to be supportive of that idea, because of course we want people to be covered, of course we want people to have coverage in that realm, but when we look at other aspects of social services, particularly what happened in the state of Minnesota, and you look at the fraud there, right? I think we do have an obligation to audit and make sure that these services and these funds are going to the people who need them. For example, here in the state of New York, $2.1 billion in Medicaid fraud uncovered by Comptroller DiNapoli, going towards people who don't even live in this state. You know, that's something that I think we should be mindful of as we pursue a supportive role here.
You were on the letter, I believe, for that audit, right?
Yes.
By your conference.
Yes.
Why was that something you wanted to sign up with?
Well, I think it's important, obviously, the state of Minnesota having these issues and the $2.1 billion in Medicaid fraud that we saw here, we're prone to that as well. But I also don't believe that freezing the resources that the federal government is calling for is a way to solve that. You know, an audit is the responsible thing to do because it's going to make sure that the people who need these resources that they're intended for, that's where it's going. If the state right now and the city, Mayor Mamdani and Governor Hochul seem to be in agreement of universal child care, how are we going to do that effectively if we're not making sure that we're being accountable and that these resources are going to where they need to go?
Are you in agreement of universal child care?
I am, so long as it's going to where it needs to go. I think right now we have some accountability to take, responsibility for, right? And I think if we can do that in a way that's delivering these resources and this funding to the people who actually need them, right? And we're confident that that's happening. I think it's something that we can pursue in a bipartisan way.
When it comes to costs, and we hear so much about spending in this state, and you mentioned one aspect there of trying to find waste or fraud, if you will. What about shifting costs? Is there anything that you think needs to have a more of an emphasis right now when it comes to spending in New York State that won't raise the budget beyond its already bloated parameters, as you would say?
Certainly, I think there's always opportunity for that. I mean, every year we talk about the Hollywood tax credit.
Yeah.
As something that maybe we should look at cutting back on and shifting those costs towards. Again, I think we should be looking at that. And I know that there's parts of New York that certainly benefit from that, but the rising costs that we see continuously in the state, and I don't know if you saw this, I'm sure you did, being in the industry that you're in, New York State also ranking at the bottom of the barrel in terms of home ownership, right? And we continue to see people leaving the state. I think it's time that we take a more serious look at that.
And then at the end, and I did want to ask you, we haven't had a chance to see you, we talked just briefly about Venezuela and this government policy. As a state, as it doesn't really have much of a role in deciding that, but just you're a veteran, your perspective on some of the actions being taken by this federal government right now when it comes to foreign policy.
I think the foreign policy that we have demonstrated in Venezuela is certainly one that seems to have gone not necessarily rogue, but not communicating in a way that I think most people want their federal government to. Communicating with Congress on a broader foreign policy and taking out somebody like Maduro, not necessarily taking him out, but bringing him to account, right? Because I think everybody would want that, right? And I can understand why they would want to keep that under wraps and under a certain element of secrecy, right, in order to carry that mission out. But I think what everybody is asking for now is what's the plan, right? And this is to the point of communicating, right, not just within the executive realm, but legislatively as well, because a definite plan on what needs to happen next isn't going to just come from, an effective plan, I should say, isn't just going to come from the executive. It's going to come from a broader sense of the United States and the federal government as a whole.
Yeah, turning that back now to state issues with veterans, I know that's something that you've been invested in addressing. What's one thing or a couple things that you're looking to do this session to help continue that environment?
Well, we want to give the Department of Veterans Services more resources. And this is something that we've been in constant communication with across the aisle, as always, in a bipartisan way. Right now, we're working with the University of Syracuse. So Syracuse plays a pivotal role in terms of research, and right now we are trying to bridge that gap and bring them perhaps on board with the state of New York into providing data for the Department of Veterans Services for a targeted approach. Wow. And this is something that they've done in the city of New York. This is something that they've done for the state of North Carolina. Tennessee, I believe, as well. So they are a nationally recognized research engine for veterans and families. And this is something that I think the state of New York should be taking advantage of.
Finally, Lieutenant Governor Delgado is going to preside over the Senate today. Considering the current dynamic with the governor's office, you expecting a certain reaction? I guess, how does that all play politically right now?
I've had the opportunity to serve with the lieutenant governor when he was a congressman.
Yeah.
Our district overlaps. I think he's very friendly. I've had a good relationship with him. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. Thanks, Jake. Appreciate the time. Thanks.
You got it. Thanks.